Alright, so I don't know how many actual feminists go along with the line of thought that being a stay-at-home mom is oppressive, but it is definitely a mentality that I have come across before. You know, you come across this idea that, make me a sandwich bitch sort of mentality when it comes to being a stay-at-home whatever partner, domestic partner, or wife, or stay-at-home mom, or whatever it is you are being suppressed or oppressed by your male counterpart because you're not the one making the money. Because you're the one who stays at home with the kids. And, I think that's just an outright lie. The feminists will make it out like, staying home and having the TV on while you're making some dinner for the kids and maybe picking up a few toys and teaching them and maybe changing some diapers. And, kids are a lot of work, but they're also really great. And somebody's got to do it. Like, you can't ignore your kids. It's a choice that you've made. So I think about it this way. We have to work to civilize our children. And when I see that, I mean that legitimately. Like, we are animals. We are born animals. We have to instill human nature into our children. And you have to do that by teaching them things like integrity and responsibility and communication. And when you are off in the workforce and you just hand your kid over to a nanny or a daycare or something like that, you don't know what sort of instruction that your child's going to get from them in terms of how to be a proper human being. And so it's really important, especially in your child's formative years, to see good examples of what it means to be a good human being, because that's the example they're going to grab onto and hold on to, and that's what they're going to seek, And I was really lucky when I was young, because when I was really young in my formative years, I was around really good people. My mom was always there for me. She always took care of me as a young child. My father was always engaging and playful. My sister and I fought, but that's typical of two kids born 5 years apart. So, especially with the first one being a spoiled fucking brat and materialistic, and the second one being overly emotional. Talking about myself, of course. Not that my sister's not overly emotional. But I tend to cry more, I guess. And I was really blessed, though, to have, people around me who were really strong examples, like my uncle in the Midwest. He works really hard at a factory. I remember when I was young, he would come home really late at night, when we would go over and visit, because we'd spend the night at his house instead of my grandmother's house. She was kind of not a nice person to most of the adults in the family. I didn't notice it because I was like really young at the time, but she's a horrible person. But the thing is, to me, as a small child, and she never took out her anger on the small children, right, was she always told me Jesus loved me, which I think, looking back on that was actually a really good thing. And not in a you have to be religious way, but more in it instilled, I think, self-worth. You go, okay, you tell a little child, okay, God loves you, Jesus loves you. My boyfriend's little boy, I gave him a book, and what I wrote in it was, here's a book to show you the wondrous way God made you. And so my idea on that is that if he thinks that he's made in some sort of wonderful way, maybe he'll have more self-worth, like, and it's multifold, of course, because that's one of my intentions with that inscription, but another intention, of course, is to try to introduce him to the concept of God, because I do believe in God. And his father has absolutely no problem with my religiosity whatsoever, which is really nice compared to, like, my ex, who is sort of an asshole. Anyway. The point is that you have to build them into proper little human beings. And, like, I have a sister who does work. And there are definitely ways to balance it, right? If you want to work. Like, I'm not saying don't work. What I'm saying, though, is you still have to be there for your kids and train and structure your kids into being decent human beings. And by the way, if you do that, if you teach them things like, hey, honey, come over, and hey, Timmy, come on, help mommy pick up your toys. Oh, you're such a strong boy. Thank you, honey. Like, really laying on thick with the little boys. And then the little girls are just pre-programmed to want to please. Little boys are a little bit more, you gotta really work with them, But once you get them all trained, like, your life becomes a lot easier. Like, I gotta tell you, it's not a lot of work having the 4-year-old around, the little boy, Xander. He's very well civilized. His father has spent a lot of time talking with him and playing with him and teaching him. And if his dad goes, let's pick up the toys, he will actually spend time picking up the toys. Now, you have to tell him and prompt him to do that, which is fine. That's what a mother or a parent should be doing until your child is actually proficient at doing it themselves. It's one thing my mom wasn't really great at, but so you do have to nag. It's good to nag your kids because, it's one of the things that helps them learn how to build habits. You have to help them build the healthy habits that are going to get them through life. Keeping track of their expenses. Being responsible, and you can start that really young, by the way. Like really young. And you can do it with jelly beans, or any form of fake currency for the house, Like, you can do all sorts of things to teach your children how to be decent human beings who can navigate the world properly, And really, the idea, though, is, and I'm really happy that I have a boyfriend who has been such a good father to his kid, because that kid is civilized. And what you want is for your kid to be civilized by about 3 or 4 years old. And what I mean by that is you don't want them running around being a little tyrant yelling, no, 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 no. You want the kid to be able to sit there and have a conversation with you. Not like a complex conversation, but I made dinner the other night, some spaghetti. And I go, well, is Xander going to eat any of this? And he might. And he liked spaghetti when he was a kid. And the kid sat there, and he whined, and he complained, and I don't want you, doing the fake, alligator tears and stuff. But you know what he didn't do? He didn't take the plate and throw it. He didn't grab the food and make a mess. He didn't throw a temper tantrum. He complained and he whined a little bit. And he took tiny, tiny, tiny bites. Because he wanted donuts. But we weren't going to give him donuts unless he took a big bite. And he didn't take a big bite, so he didn't get into donuts. But he started doing that, that fake crying thing. And I was just like, Xander, why are you crying when all I'm trying to do is make your life better? Trying to make you eat yummy food. It's nothing to cry about. And the thing is that kid you might not think the kid understands something like that, but that's gonna seep in at some point. Like, I've already told my niece that she needs to be a good and holy person, like, and she's not even a year old yet. Like, I truly and honestly believe that, especially as we get more evolved and more advanced as, you know, people and creatures and stuff like that, in, you know, an evolutionary sense, that, you know, speech is going to become more and more pre-programmed in our brains, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, it's gonna be faster and faster. You can see it with kids already. They learn how to read faster and faster. I am so amazed because Xander, when I was about his age, I could count to 10, maybe 11. I could count to 10, and I knew there were things after 10, right? Like, I knew there were things. I just didn't know the words for them. And, Xander can count up to like 20, I think. Maybe more. I'm not really sure. But he goes up into the teens at least. Like, and he pays attention to numbers and words. And I think he loses track around the late teens is probably where he loses track. Because he counted about all the way up to 15 or so. And then at some point, the number got smaller. So... But yeah, you know, that's what you get. Either a kid who's really pleasant because you spent time with them and civilized them, or you get a kid who's a fucking tyrant because you've ignored them. And they're like, I'm gonna get what I need regardless of whether or not you fucking want to give it to me. I'm gonna make sure you know I need it. That's the other thing. You gotta make your kids feel safe, you know, like, especially if you have, like, a sensitive kid. Like, what does that do to them to send them off to some stranger to watch for several hours a day? And I'm not trying to guilt women who want to work. That's not the thing. But this is a consideration to take into account, considering the fact that you did bring a pretty complex living organism that needs to be programmed into the world. Okay, I cannot... I mean, this was your choice to create this thing that has to have so much work put into it. Like, I really wish women understood that. But at the same time, once you put in that hard work, things get so infinitely better. So infinitely better. And then at that point, it's so easy being a stay-at-home mom. You get your last kid potty trained and civilized enough to sit at a dinner table for 20 or 30 minutes. Oh my god. At that point, you're fucking golden. Like, I mean, at that point, you could go work and it would be fine. You wouldn't have to be a stay-at-home mom. But, like, really, the rest of it? People always complain that, like, it's so much work doing house chores and stuff like that. It's like, but no, it's not. And I know it's not because I do it. I fucking do it. You know, it's like, oh, the kitchen floor needs swept. That's 5 minutes. Literally. 10 if you've got a large kitchen. 15 if you decide to do the dining room as well. Maybe 20 if you sweep the entire downstairs. It's not that much work. And then there's the laundry, of course. Which, oh my god, so oppressed. You have to do laundry. You have to take clothes out of a hamper and put it into a washer and put a Tide Pod in it? Think about this. If you were living in Africa right now, in a straw hut, you wouldn't even have Tide Pods. Do you get that? Do you really think being a stay-at-home mom is that oppressive? That throwing clothes from a hamper into a washer is too difficult? Just throw a Tide Pod in. Shut it. Make sure your teenagers don't get into it. That's probably the most difficult thing about doing the laundry, is just making sure you hide the Tide Pods afterwards so that your kids can't do the Tide Pod challenge. Really, and then after that, it's literally another 30 seconds to move the clothes from the washer to the dryer. Not difficult. Not difficult whatsoever. It's just not hard. Even if you had to do a couple of special things to a couple pieces of clothing, it's like, you're a stay-at-home mom. You have all fucking day to do it. Like, even if your kids are freaking out that day, it's like, okay, do it tomorrow. You got the time. It's not as if it's a pressing matter. Then on top of it, you've got the dishwasher. Like, do you know how much work it is to load dishes in a dishwasher? Not that much work. And then if you train your kids, rinse off your dishes before, after you're done eating. Rinse them off, and you gotta nag them. You have to. That's how you build habits in your kids, is you gotta nag them. Did you clean your room? Did you brush your teeth? Did you comb your hair? I'm sorry, but kids need to be taught these things. Like, they really do. A lot of things you think are common sense, people don't know until you tell them. Once you tell them, there's kind of like this light that goes on, and they go, oh, that's a great idea. Oh, that makes so much sense. It's like, for instance, it's a really simple concept. If you just make yourself look a little nicer, the odds of you being promoted increase. You tell people this. Just make yourself look a little nicer. Just put a little more effort in. The odds of you being promoted significantly increase. And I don't mean you have to go expensive. But, like, I take care of my hair. And, it's just habit now for me to put oil in my hair and to brush it out and stuff. And I've found a effective and efficient way of making my hair look nice. And I spend time, keeping my eyebrows look nice. And when I go to the store to buy work clothes, I buy cheap but nice blouses. Because I want to look presentable at work. And I take the time well, I should take the time, I don't always, but I take the time to hang up my clothes and, to make sure they're not as wrinkled and whatnot, and so on and so forth. And, these are all just habits that you have to build. And your role as a mother is to build them in your children, quite frankly. And, ideally your husband would be helping in that. Well, like I said, once you get them basically civilized, your life is fairly easy. And if you started early, you can get them civilized earlier than 3. You got to confront the terrible 2s, right? Which is the main, probably the main hurdle point, because that's when kids start actually developing a self-consciousness or a soul. And I don't think there's any difference between being self-aware and having a soul. I think that's exactly what having a soul means. And so, as a 2-year-old, that's when you start to realize you are separate from other people. I vaguely remember that I have memories about my parents. I have memories about my parents, and I have a memory of a dream. So, the memory I have about my parents, essentially is they were having an argument, and they were yelling at each other, and they were yelling each other's name. Gary! Blah, 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 blah. Sandy, blah, 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 blah. Back and forth. Gary, Sandy, Gary, Sandy, Gary, Sandy. And I realized that they had names. And so, to me, I look back at that and I go, well, I realized that was a crucial moment where I realized that they were, two separate people. And I think that, what really drove it home actually was them arguing, because I would think for a small child that it would be very confusing to think about things in terms of separateness, because being apart from a parent is not comfortable. You're generally not away from somebody comforting. And so you have to start to learn how to differentiate other people and yourself. And so the first step, I think, is to realize that other people, and maybe this is why I didn't have a terrible twos as far as I know. I was not particularly a horrible child growing up. I was fairly easygoing. But I think subconsciously I did realize that my parents were two different people, right? And I think maybe when I finally realized that I was my own person, that didn't freak me out, because I had already seen it or something like that. And then, so around that time, I think I also had a dream. And this dream was very interesting because I think it was very archetypical. And I've thought about it a lot, and I never was able to quite figure out what it was. And I'm thinking that I keep getting closer and closer to what it really symbolizes, because it's a very arcane, right? And it's me as representation of me. And that's the first memory that I can recall being aware of me. Probably as a separate entity or something like that. And I had like a mind's eye image of myself. So it'd been after a point where I had already seen myself as a little girl. So I was old enough to have seen myself in a mirror or something like that and recall that. Because I had a mind's eye of image of what I looked like at the time, right? And then there was this, I want to call it like a masked figure, but it wasn't masked. It was like a face or something, and it was like it came upon me, and then it was like I was or like I fell off of a sidewalk or something, and kind of just fell into darkness. And I think about it more and more, and at the time, I remember thinking something about my mom, but that really confused me, because my mom was nothing like what I had encountered, right? My mom was always really mild. She has depression, so she's very reserved, and she's kind of stoic. But very mild-tempered, and she doesn't generally yell or anything like that. And I think she spanked me once. But this figure didn't feel like that, but for some reason it made me think of my mother. So it's this very interesting sort of awakening to consciousness, I guess, that I had personally as a 2-year-old, or around that age, maybe 3 or 4 years old. I have no idea where I had that dream. But it's the first one that I can personally recall having. And then after that point, my memories start getting a lot better, especially as things progress. Like, I remember, following my sister around and she was always annoyed, like, and then I'd get, like, trapped behind the couch because she wouldn't help me out. Asshole. And so, yeah, I'm talking about all my experiences, but most kids don't come into consciousness quite that nicely, they don't do it on their own. They don't have the same sort of realizations on their own, maybe, that they're separate entities. And so coming to terms with it when it's confronting you over and over and over again, when you get to a certain point, can be really scary. And it can be important to have, somebody around helping you through that. Like, honey, it's okay. You don't have to, honey, don't throw a temper tantrum. No, you're not going to get what you want that way. Don't do that. And just, you have to coach your kids through it because it's a really, really hard time in their lives. If you want to think about, like, your child's life, you think about it as a series of births. So the first birth is perhaps conception, right? And so when you conceive, you're already a mother. And so you have to take care of your body. You can't drink alcohol, you can't smoke weed, you can't smoke cigarettes, you can't go do dangerous things or lift heavy objects. You have to take care of your body, and you take vitamins and eat properly and all that stuff to take care of the infant inside. And then, as your child comes into the world, that's, their birthday, their birth, and then, and that's always chaotic and painful and joyous at the same time. And then around, I would say about 2 years old is when they have a third birth, and that's the birth of their self-consciousness. And it doesn't have to happen exactly at 2. It could happen a little bit before that or after that. None of these time frames are set, but I think that's really the time when kids start developing that sense of me, ego, sense of self, sense of being a separate entity from their parents, and all of that stuff. And some births are really hard, just like some physical births are really hard, and some births are really easy, just as some physical births are really easy. And you just kind of have to roll with the punches. And it's better if you have a sensitive kid who's having a hard time through those terrible twos. It's probably better to be there for them than to send them off to a daycare. I'm just saying. Like, it's a really hard time in a child's life. Like, outrageously hard. And if it's done wrong, like, it can really seriously fuck up a kid for life. Like, and it's not hard to do it right, but you do have to be attentive, and you do have to be there. People act like parenting is so hard. It's just like, no. It's really basic. You take responsibility for yourself. You teach your kids how to take responsibility for themselves, and the rest of it falls into place. And taking responsibility for yourself means taking responsibility for the things you've created and the things that you've done in life, and that's one of those things is your child. It doesn't mean you can't ever work again. It just means that maybe you prioritize your child over your work life. That's a good thing. That's the next generation. People are so focused on careers, but, I think what women miss on the whole concept of a career, especially when men do it, is the fact that men are doing it because they want a woman. Like, the internal evolutionary drive is one, to breed, and to reproduce. And the best way to do that is to have as many resources as you possibly can. And if you have a lot of resources, you can find a high quality, genetically beautiful woman to settle down with you and raise your children. Like, that was the whole point of having a career, was to provide for a family. And so for a woman to go off and have a career and to not have a family, it's incredibly empty. Like, men don't go off with, in general, to go have careers without the intention of having a family. Like, most men intend to have families. They intend to have a wife. It's one of the reasons why a lot of men work as hard as they do. I don't know if I've been very coherent in this video, because I have a lot of thoughts surrounding it, and hopefully I will make a better and more coherent video in the future. But I think in the end, what I would really like to just say is, like, there's just a lot of hatred around single motherhood, or not single motherhood, I'm sorry, stay-at-home moms, you know, who have the husband who's out breadwinning. But it's just such an important role to play in your child's life. Like, why would you want to leave that up to chance? Why would you want to leave that up to somebody else? You know, you want to make sure that when you send your child out into the world, they know how to be responsible for themselves. They know how to have integrity. They know how to brush their teeth and clean their room and comb their hair and look nice for a job interview, and, you know, all of those things that are so important to know and to learn, and that, you know, a lot of us think might be common sense, but until you sit down and you actually tell somebody that, maybe it's not. And, you know, as a parent, you have to deal with all of the flaws that your child has. And you have to try to help them smooth those over. And to help them get themselves where they're better than they were the day before. And you have to do that by your example. And if you are a career woman, just make sure you spend time with your kids. Teaching them, loving on them, showing them you care. Because in the end, that's what the most important thing is your kids. Your career in 100 years will not be there. But your grandkids will.